it's time. We have over 40 participants, and that is an excellent
Oh
number.
my goodness.
Here's some upcoming events. If you don't know me, I'm Don Graves. I am the president of the Gila Native Plant Society. Wendy, she's in the back. You see her face popping in when I have trouble. She's always there. She's literally the brains of this whole operation. And I thank her for that. Let's have some announcements here. One of the things is that the Gila Native Plant Society has been working with the Southwest New Mexico Audubon Society from time to time to do some joint programs. And we just did a Birds and Brew. I did it with Elroy Limmer. It was absolutely fantastic. It was a great experience talking about our native pollinators, our local native pollinators and host plants. But coming up on January 29th, Saturday, and this isn't really a joint program, but the Audubon Society, local Audubon Society, is having a field trip, a birding field trip to Lake Roberts. And we're going to meet at 8 a.m. at the Western New Mexico University parking lot, Fine Arts area. And then for those of you that are, somewhere between Silver City and Lake Roberts, about 9:15, we'll meet at the dam at Lake Roberts. And local, just recent reports from today, some at least 3 bald eagles. The waterfowl should be good. So if you're interested, just contact the Southwest New Mexico Audubon and for more particulars, or you can email us at Gila Native. So tonight is the fabulous flora of City of Rocks, but tomorrow, as a follow-up, which is really wonderful, we have our wonderful cadre of botanists, and Ed Like, who is cactus and succulent expert. He is going to lead the show. And then Bill Norris, Western New Mexico University, and Russ Kleinman, Western New Mexico University as well. So we have a great lineup of experts in the field. So that's tomorrow, and we are going to meet at 10 o'clock at City of Rocks at the Visitor Center. Okay, so it'll be warming up a little bit by then, and it's basically from 10 to noon. So on Friday, February 18th, the Gila Native Plant Society has spring blooms in the Southwest, and Donna Stevens, our own Donna Stevens, she is one of the co-authors of Common Southwestern Native Plants, and she'll be talking, and hopefully, we've had some rain this fall and winter, so we're hoping, kind of crossing our fingers, that we really do have a good spring bloom. Because if you haven't seen a good spring bloom in this area, you just sometimes have to wait. It's fantastic. On March 18th, Ron Perry is back with the Moths of the Gila, updated, revised. And we're going to try to talk Ron into talking a little bit in relationship to what we talked about in our Birds and Brew with these local native pollinators and our host plants and how moths figure into that. And then on February 23rd and 24th, the Gila Native Plant Society is really honored and pleased to be one of the major sponsors of the 9th Natural History of the Gila Symposium. And it says face-to-face. I think it's going to be hybrid. So maybe Bill can talk a little bit about that later. But at Western New Mexico University, this is something that's been going on, like I said, almost 10 years now. And so that's another opportunity for you to learn more about the area in which we live. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing. Hopefully all of you are muted, and I'm going to mute myself as well. So Bill, if you want to screen share now. We have 46 participants right now. That is fantastic. Fantastic.
The pressure's on. Holy moly.
Yeah, Bill, your slide looks great, and you're ready to roll. I'm going to mute myself. And what I would ask participants, if you have a question, use that chat room, use that chat, make a comment or ask a question. And as we go, I might interject a little bit and ask Bill a question, but then at the end, we'll have more questions and open it up. Okay, Bill.
Okay. Thanks for inviting me to give this presentation to talk about an area that I'm just passionate about for a lot of reasons. City Rock State Park, and this is co-sponsored, of course, by the Gila chapter of the Native Plant Society and Friends of City of Rocks. I've been working on a big plant inventory of this park since the early 2000s, about 2004. I'm going to, a little bit later, tell you how that came about. And I need to acknowledge, first of all, if I can get this, there we go, my good buddy, Tim Geddes, who's been involved with this project for about 10 years. I met him at the last workshop on plant identification. Some of you knew Jack Carter back in 2012. Tim had just retired. He's from the Southeast. And he just came up to me during this workshop and, hey, Bill, would you like, he's got a Southern drawl, and he's going to be along tomorrow on this field trip. Would you like someone to tag along with you? Sure. And we've become close friends, and we've probably been out there 30 or 40 times in the last 10 years. So he's a real important part of this project. And I also want to acknowledge this picture was not taken at City of Rocks. My good buddy, Russ Kleinman, who has not been out there as much, at least with me, as Tim has, but I've been out there enough with Russ. And if you're new to the area, you need to be aware of GilaFlora.com, which is a spectacular website which contains photographs of it. About, Russ, well, you can't because you're muted. I think there's about 1,500 plant species in the Gila region, and he's really expanded from vascular plants. He's become one of the Southwest experts on mosses and liverworts. Russ has been out with me and sometimes with Tim quite a bit. And so part of doing plant inventory work is the camaraderie when you go out. And I've been out with some other folks as well. So I just want to acknowledge these two right off the bat, this great project I've been involved in. So I just recently met some new friends, Susan and Bert. I know they're in attendance, and they have not been to City of Rocks. I know they're planning on coming tomorrow. And so I'm going to, I guess, maybe spoil some of the surprise, because the first time anyone goes out there and you turn off of, you get on Highway 61 off of 180, and then you hang that left. I think it's called City of Rocks Road, and suddenly before you, it's like, what's that? You see this big geologic formation, and you continue on downhill, and you approach the park, and you can see it looks like a big Stonehenge. And then you enter the park, and it's about a mile one way around the loop road. There are these big pillars of rock everywhere. It's just spectacular. It just kind of hits you like a bucket of water. What are these rocks doing here? At least that was my impression when I first went out there almost 20 years ago. I can tell you, and I am not a geologist, so I quote unquote borrowed this image off the internet, and you can, I'll read the caption here because it says it better than anything I could say. Where did these pillars come from? Gigantic ash flow from a nearby supervolcano caldera erupted 35 million years ago. Eroded rocks shaped by water and wind. And I can tell you, if you get out to the park, and many of you I hope will be coming out tomorrow, go into the visitor center. There's a really nice mural, and I couldn't photograph the whole thing, but it explains in as much detail as you might want to know the history of the park, its volcanic origin. So we'll let this mural tell the story if you go to the park and check it out. But, you know, it's volcanic in origin, dating back to what I learned is the Oligocene. Now it's called the Paleogene. I think the geologists have kind of redefined some of those geologic eras. But this, excuse me, presentation about plants. I'm a botanist, and I'm going to give you a little, just to kind of, not so much to kind of talk about myself, but I want to tell you why I got so interested in this project. I grew up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I'm a Yooper, and of course, it's been a long time. I grew up with boreal forest. I got to know that flora pretty well. And then when I was a young man in my 20s, back in the 80s, I was a high school teacher near Green Bay, Wisconsin. And of course, I'm going to be watching the Packers hopefully beat the 49ers tomorrow. But that's beside the point here. So I got to learn that northeastern deciduous forest pretty well. I was in grad school in Iowa for about 9 years and fell in love with tallgrass prairie, lived in Colorado with my spouse for a year, and I've done a lot of backpacking and traveling throughout the West. So I got pretty familiar with that part of the Western flora. When I moved here in 2001 and got this dream job, being able to teach all these field biology classes in the Gila, and I felt I had a lot to learn, but I felt pretty comfortable with the riparian flora along the Gila River and the flora of the mountains. But very quickly, I realized I didn't know anything about this desert flora. This was brand new. And I also realized pretty quick that I better learn something about this flora because I have to teach my students about it. And I discovered that we have a good representation of this Chihuahua desert flora at City of Rock State Park. And some of you who zoomed in a little early, you heard that, I'm still working and my time's pretty limited. It's convenient for me to go out to City of Rocks on a Sunday morning, often with my friend Tim, sometimes with Russ, to spend a half a day there. And so I've had a chance over the last, since about 2004, to really, I think, get to know the park pretty well, and I just fell in love with it. So not knowing anything about the desert flora, starting around 2004, I just really started this dedicated effort. I learned about plants like desert marigold and Blackfoot daisy. I'll save pronouncing these Latin names. Mariola, spiny blue bowls, what a name. Sage leaf bahia, desert dandelion. I didn't know it was anything besides European dandelion until I moved down here. Twin leaf senna, tar bush, black grama, bush muley, tobosa, burrow grass. These are all desert scrubland, desert grassland plants that I made their first acquaintance at City of Rock State Park. And twisted spine prickly pear, Fendler's prickly pear, little nipple cactus, and as Don mentioned, there is a botany hike tomorrow starting at 10 o'clock, and it's a real treat. Ed Like is a real expert on succulents, and cacti are his specialty. In particular, these these hedgehog cacti right here, and I need to change. That's a little error right there. So I'm interested in learning a lot about cacti from Ed tomorrow. Crucifixion thorn right at the entrance. You can see this horrible looking plant, gray thorn. So in about 2004, I embarked on this plant inventory, which Tim joined me about 10 years ago. Plant inventory of City of Rock State Park. And those of us who are in this business, you're pressing plants in the field, you're collecting plants, and there's kind of a standard protocol for conducting plant inventories. And one aspect of this I feel is very important. If you ever find yourself in our visiting our herbarium, we have hundreds of specimens collected at City of Rock State Park, because if you're in the business of documenting what plants are in an area, you need to have a specimen to back it up. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to go out if I find a rare plant and collect that. We'll photograph that. But it's really important. This is a step in conducting plant inventories that, at least especially in recent days, is frequently omitted. And I just feel it's unfortunate. It's this crucial that voucher specimens, an example of that plant that you've collected in the field, in this case City of Rocks, is collected, its identification is verified, and it becomes deposited. And here we have the Dale A. Zimmerman Herbarium, which has quite a few specimens from City of Rocks. So conducting a plant inventory, of course, involves a lot of field work, and here are some of the standard tools. And Russ, who's in attendance, I've already mentioned, he teaches plant taxonomy here at Western, and he's always, the students he has, they have to do a plant collection of about 100 plants, so the students get a plant press. And when he goes out together with the students, or I go out with my students in other classes, a pry bar is a useful tool for digging up a plant, which is kind of really got its roots down there in that hard soil. A pair of clippers for taking off shoots off of woody plants. It's important to bring a field book to collect data, the specific location, whether in lat long or UTM coordinates, which means you got to bring a GPS unit with you. And as I learned, totally different concept for me, moving from the fairly moist upper Midwest. Boy, you don't have a ice chest with some ice in it, you might get back and find your plants all dried out. So for me, the back of my Honda, I've always got a cooler there, so I can put the plants usually in Ziploc bags, so I can keep them fresh until I have a chance to press them. These are the basic tools when you're going out and collecting an example of specimen of a plant species that you want to document as occurring in a particular area, like City of Rock State Park. This is just a little overview of what's involved in doing a plant inventory. And as I alluded to, some things, either they're really uncommon or they don't lend themselves to being collected. Try to make a specimen of a barrel cactus. So what we do there is we take photographs, and it's very appropriate to take a print of a photograph along with the standard label information that would go with a real plant specimen, and to submit that for deposit into a herbarium. So just want to emphasize, we go out, my rule of thumb is about 10, 15 plants. I may take one plant. If it's less than that, we're going to take a photograph, because the business of documenting plants in a plant inventory is not about extirpating the plant from the area of interest. And then there's this aspect of plant inventory, identifying the plants and mounting the plants. And then a lot of you know Angela Flanders. We have a great team of volunteers: Betsy Cato, Jane Spinty, Karen Nakakahara. I just happen to have pictures of Angela right here. These specimens go into our herbarium, and so for future study. So these are the basic kind of aspects of doing a plant inventory. And I'm going to just give you a little preview of our results, since I've been working on this for a good part of the last decade and a half. Up to year 2022, we found about 320 plant species. I'm sure we're going to find more for reasons that you're going to see. I want to acknowledge again, Russ has gone out with me a lot. My buddy Tim Javier Kirker, who's now a ranger out the Forest Service. He spent a year studying the flora in the late around 2009. He made a major contribution to this project as well. Now, I want you to think about, a lot of people look upon plant inventory work and collecting plants as kind of anachronistic. Nobody does that anymore. A lot of you knew Richard Felger. Of course, unfortunately passed away with the last year and a half, and he has a number of published floras. And if Richard were in attendance, he would tell you exactly the same thing that I just shared with you, the importance of collecting specimens. And so I'm not just going to go through and give you reasons right now. You're going to see this same slide later on. But I've just encountered in my career a bit of resistance and basically kind of long looks from botanists who do more molecular work. And I have nothing against people who are doing molecular genetic work. That's important as well. But sometimes what is lost are these traditional botany studies, like this one I've been working on since 2004. Okay. Having spent a lot of time at City of Rocks, I've seen so many of these plants so many times. Some of them, it seems like I've developed a special relationship with them. They have special significance. And one of the things that early on I thought about, before the Friends of City of Rocks was formed, and now we have a really good Friends of City of Rocks organization, if we were to have a designated plant to be the signature plant of City of Rocks, what would it be? All these plants here can be found at City of Rocks, and I quickly concluded it's got to be this delicate little thing, this little mint, Arizona blue curls, which you start seeing middle of the summer, late summer. I just think this is the most beautiful little plant. You can pretty easily see this amongst the rocks along that loop road. This would be my choice, and everybody agrees with me, but anyway, that's my prerogative to have my preference. This would be the signature plant of City of Rocks to be featured on T-shirts and cats, etc. Of course, most people are thinking more about cacti and yuccas and agaves. But among those 320 plus plant species at City of Rock State Park, mid-late summer, you can find this beautiful, delicate little mint, Arizona blue curls. And we have to consider when we're doing the plant inventory, there are some plants there that don't belong. They've been introduced. And the most conspicuous non-native plant by far, in my experience, is Lehman's lovegrass. It's all along the roadsides, in particular near the visitor center, Eragrostis lehmanniana. The entire flora is not native. We have some non-native species. If we're lucky tomorrow, and I'm sure Ed will take us over by the botanical gardens, a place Tim and I have found Hayter's nipplewort, Mammillaria hayteri. It's a very inconspicuous plant. It's like a low dome. It almost sinks into the ground. It's probably a lot more common than people realize. But getting this relationship and kind of these plants taking on personalities. This is one of the most inconspicuous plants that I'm aware of that's probably pretty common at the park. And if we see that, I'm sure Ed will have a lot to say about this. I see there's a chat message here, Don. Shall I take it now or shall we wait? guess we're going to wait. Let me just, okay, that came from Don. So here's something to think about. If you came on that field trip last October, which was well attended, it was just a very memorable trip. We had some great folks come along. It was a great day. Plants were really looking lush. The most tasty plant at City of Rocks, I guess that depends on who you ask. Having taught a class on range vegetation for almost 20 years, I've learned a lot about these desert grasses around here. And I found that these grama grasses, and there's, City of Rocks was established, at least the original mile square, I think in 1952, 1953. Prior to that, there was no doubt there was active grazing in the park as part of our culture. And I have learned these grama grasses, I've heard this expression, to a rancher, to a cow rather, these grama grasses are like Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And I'm not a rancher, but if you got a big patch of grama grass in an open rangeland and a desert grassland, these are the things which are favored for grazing. So I guess if you ask a cow, some of the parks, some of the recent acquisitions have been recently grazed, they'd probably answer all these grama grasses. And there we go. But I have to throw this picture in here. I won't say this is the most tasty plant. Every time I see this very fibrous soap tree yucca that's been browsed, I wonder to myself, I wonder what's been eating this. And I suspect when Don opens this up for comments, I suppose some of you, I'm sure, have some ideas. I have a few ideas what eats soap tree yucca. You see this more frequently than you might imagine. This is a really fibrous plant. Be rough on your digestive system, but some animals are using this for food. And most fragrant plant by far, at least in my opinion, is this Wright's bee bush. It's in the Verbenaceae. It's close related to the mints. Every time I see this plant, it just fills my senses. It's overwhelming. It's just it's a beautiful plant, and it produces this very memorable odor. So that's my candidate for the most fragrant plant at City of Rocks. Hands down, the most smelly plant, the foul-smelling plant at City of Rocks, and this you can see all over Silver City Buffalo Gourd. This plant might as well have been named armpit plant because that's exactly what it smells like. Not real common at the park. Tim and I, it was a number of years before we finally saw one of these, and that's just as well. It's a native plant, but this plant really stinks, and as far as cucumbers go, Buffalo Gourd. There's a lot of Mormon tea, a couple species out at the park, and they have ephedrine, the plant most likely to enhance performance, athletic performance, but don't try it. And I know we have some physicians in attendance here today. That's something that you don't want to ingest, but that's why this plant is called ephedra, because it's, among other things, it contains ephedrine. This is a plant, it's type of an acrogymnosperm, and it's got some interesting characteristics. It's not a conifer, not a flowering plant. The most annoying plant at City of Rocks, and in part this is due to me, sometimes I'll run out to the park on short notice with a pair of sneakers or tennis shoes, and there's a lot of mesquite at the parks. Of course, many of you have seen big open grown mesquite trees, but at City of Rocks, some of the mesquite trees don't get very tall. They're pretty low. And you'd be walking along in the desert scrubland, desert grassland, suddenly you feel something in your shoe. Invariably, you've picked up a spine, one of these stipular spines from a mesquite. I just experienced this today. Dealt with my ecology class, not at City of Rocks, up on the hill on the northwest part of campus. And one of my students, where there's a lot of mesquite, suddenly I saw her kind of looking like she was in pain. She picked up a spine from a mesquite plant. So that's my candidate for the most annoying plant at City of Rocks. By far, the most intimidating plant at the park, it's right at the park entrance, is this crucifixion thorn. We will probably see this very plant. Well, maybe not this very plant. This doesn't look like it was taken at City of Rocks. So you look at this, I mean, this is not a plant I would want to fall over into. And I'm sure Ed or Russ or myself will comment on this tomorrow. If you're looking at essentially our branches, well, this plant is a pretty lethal looking individual. So not all that common, but you'll see it. It's the first place I saw it was at City of Rocks. Excuse me. Plant most likely to inflict pain. This is a kind of a fairly nondescript, inconspicuous plant. Nose burn and the Euphorbiaceae. And beginning this project at least 10 years ago, I didn't know what this plant was, and that was the purpose of this inventory in part for me to educate myself about the flora of City of Rocks. So I just kind of nonchalantly reached down and picked it up between my thumb and forefinger, and I was immediately, the pain, more than any, if you're familiar with nettle, multiply that about ×3. This plant will really pack a punch. There's some chemicals at the tip of these hairs here. This is extremely painful. So this is a plant, when I see it, I give it wide berth. Okay, so if you see this growing amongst rocks, make sure you have on some gloves before you pick it up, if you have reason to do so. There's a number of plants at the park which are toxic. I don't know if it's fair to say that this is the most toxic plant, woolly loco weed, but I know from Gabe Madrano, who's the park manager, he does a great job out there. He says by far, when park visitors come to the visitor center and ask, what's this? This plant, I think, gets brought in more frequently than any others. Woolly loco weed, Astragalus mollissimus, which is toxic to livestock. So there's a lot of species of Astragalus. So I don't know if this is the most toxic plant at City of Rocks, but it's certainly a conspicuous toxic plant at the park. It's hairy and it's got a very distinctive, conspicuous inflorescence of flowers. And it'll start flowering around early mid-April. Few mysteries, and kind of going beyond just identification. I saw the title of Donna's presentation coming up, Donna Stevens. It's not just about creosote. Well, the furthest north, the closest natural population of creosote that I have encountered in my 21 years here in southwestern New Mexico is at City of Rocks State Park. And it's infrequent to common there. And I always make a point of bringing all my students out there so they can see it. And it's kind of anybody who's been on I-10, which in this audience is probably everybody, you know, going between Deming and Cruces, you see hundreds of acres of this. I have not found a single creosote bush plant north of City of Rocks, except for the one that was established in our spectacular Silver Creek Botanical Garden. So I think it's a pretty plant, but why is this plant, why did this distribution just stop? And I don't have the answer to this. And I gave an earlier version of this presentation to the Albuquerque chapter back in September. And a few folks offered some ideas, and my buddy Jim McGrath said, well, Bill, what about the soils? Have you looked at that? No, I haven't. I don't have the answer, but I'm still scratching my bald head. Why is there no creosote between City of Rocks and Silver City? I don't have the answer. So that's a mystery, and that's what keeps me going. End of the line. Then we have this plant, which I always show my students, my dendrology students, Arizona oak, which looks a lot like gray oak, looks a lot like scrub live oak. It's a lot more common down here in the Chiricahuas in southeastern Arizona. We have these little pockets of it in southwestern New Mexico. I don't know if I've seen this anywhere else in New Mexico. This is quite common on the Loop Road towards the north end, and I haven't seen it anywhere else. So why is it there and nowhere else in the vicinity? I don't have an answer to that question. I continue to ponder it. So we have some interesting mysteries presented by some of the plants in their occurrence in this park involving this Arizona oak. And as I wrap up, this is kind of overview of these plants. Here's a couple I haven't found that I'm sitting here in my office. If I go out the gravel between the greenhouse and Harlan Hall here in a couple of months, I'm going to see Bermuda grass. I'm going to see red stem fillery. These are very common introduced plants in Silver City. And despite lots of looking, not that I'm hoping to find these plants, Tim and I and the other folks have come out with me, we haven't found a single example of either of these plants. I'm kind of pleased about that these non-native European plants have not made their way into the park. And one of the summaries I'm going to make about this flora in a few minutes here is one of the spectacular things about the flora is most of it is still native. It still has maintained its integrity. Bermuda grass, I don't know if the Guinness Book of World Records is still being published. I don't think it is. But this was listed as the #1 most noxious weed on the face of the earth. And it's pretty common in Silver City, but it's not at the park. Okay, so let's summarize this project. To date, we found a little bit over 320 plant species, including this little leaving primrose right here, and primarily work by myself, Tim in the last 10 years, Javier, when he worked on his special project towards the end of his college career. And I'll tell you why. This figure right here, greater than 90% of all the plant species that we have found in the park are native to New Mexico. This is mind-boggling to me. I've done a lot of projects like this in the Midwest, particularly in Iowa. If you hit 80%, you're doing good. Dr. Felger came out with us a number of times, and of course, Richard, he knew the southwestern flora really well. He spent a lot of time in San Diego, and Richard told me, at least on one occasion, that there are parts of California and San Diego, less than 50% of the flora is native. So the City of Rocks gets a lot of traffic. I mean, Easter, it's just wall-to-wall cars. Despite all the traffic, it's a popular place. All kinds of opportunities for non-native plants to get introduced on tires and people's socks, etc. The flora is still intact. It's primarily a native flora. Though you'll see conspicuous, rows of that Lehman's love grass, most of the plant species are native to New Mexico. And with my upper Midwestern sensibilities, feeling like if I see something over 80%, that's a good thing. I just think this is really special. So the total number of non-native vascular plant species, less than 30, okay? 330 species plus, less than 30 of those species are native to somewhere else. Things like puncture vine, garden purslane, etc. And one of the things, standard things that people that do plant inventories do, they summarize the flora. The most diverse plant family is the aster family. And I learned from my physician when I moved here 21 years ago what the DYCs are, the damned yellow composites. There's a lot of them at the park. This is one of them. The Fabaceae, the bean family, comes in at number 3. The grass family comes in at number 2. These families are typically among the most diverse plant families to do any kind of flora in the southwestern United States. Okay, 51 grass species. That's a lot of grass species. The genera with the highest diversity are the love grasses in the genus Eragrostis, the threon grasses in the genus Aristida. Things I've learned from my students having taught range vegetation, and some of you have shown an interest in grasses. I think a lot of you know that Professor Graves is working on a book on grasses of this region, and I'm pleased to see that. And a lot of the traditional literature, the manuals will say that these Aristidas, these threons, are just the bane of the existence of ranchers. They just don't like to see it at any time. I have learned from my students, particularly those who grew up on ranches, that when these plants are young, before they develop these bristles, cows will graze on this just fine. And so it's when it's mature and it has these bristles. So the point here, Aristida, the threons, these are among, the genus Aristida is among the most diverse plant genus in City of Rocks. And I just wanted to add some things I learned from my students about the cultural history of this plant. And then we have 6 species of grama grasses, the Ben and Jerry's ice cream to a cow. I just love that analogy. And we have 6 species of mealy grass in the genus Muhlenbergia, and we have 6 species of bricklebush in the genus Burkhollia. Well, back to this question. There's Richard again. What good is a plant list? And I don't, maybe we can discuss this at the end of the presentation. As someone who's had to answer this question, some skeptical botanist, I think about this a lot. And I just think it's important, particularly looking down the road, if anyone wants to see, what kind of change is happening in the park. I think we all know our climate is warming up, and that's going to have effects on the flora. And the only way you're going to be able to analyze from a scientific perspective what's the nature of that change, you got to document the flora at different parts of different periods in time. So that's the main reason, among other reasons, that I always come up with. Why is it, what good is generating a plant list? What's the point of doing these plant inventories? And of course, for me as well, I wanted to learn that desert flora. I had a personal reason. There's a lot of other reasons, but that's what comes to mind. So Dr. Felger here, he's got a number of published floras, books, scientific papers, much of his career. He certainly did a lot more than doing plant inventory work. And fortunately, Richard was able to come out with us a couple times out to the park. He's someone who's very successfully engaged in this type of botanical research. And since I started working on this project in 2004, and then Tim joined in 2010, there have been some significant additions to the park. The original park area is a little less than a square mile. And in the last 10, 12 years, it's acquired 3 major additions, one of which is Table Mountain right here. And I can tell you that the park doesn't own all of this, it owns most of it. It's part of a bequest when Gene Simon passed away. Gene Simon was passionate about this park, and excuse me, If you ever want to get to the top of this mountain, it's not as formidable of a hike as it might look. This 62-year-old got up there and back in 2.5 hours last September. There's a trail you can hike. It kind of goes around and it comes up, and you get right up there, and you get a spectacular view of Table, from the top of Table Mountain in the north part of the park. This is one of the 3 major acquisitions, which has resulted in the park growing from an original, a little bit less than a square mile. I think Gabe told me it's about 6 square miles now. I have a lot of country that I have to cover, and I've been covering some of it with Tim, but I have a lot of other country I need to visit. And Russ and I have been, I'm going to back up here. This little seam right here is a special habitat. He and I have been up here a number of times, and there's 6 or 8 species of ferns which occur here and nowhere else. So anyway, a lot of special microhabitats providing places for particular plants to occur, like Stanley's cloak fern right here. And from the top, this is a great photograph. A lot of you know Allison Boyd. She and Jeff hiked this a number of years ago. Looking down on the park, I mean, talk about a spectacular view of all these pillars. And I'm going to take advantage of this slide. I want to point out, as I research people who study the historic vegetation of southern New Mexico and southwestern Texas, people who look at those pack rat middens and look at cores and old playa lakes. What I read is that the best supported hypothesis is that southern New Mexico in the last 10,000 years, which desert grassland, it wasn't the desert of southeastern Arizona. It was probably something like this. Okay, so I always make a point. I'm not able to bring my students to the top of Table Mountain. We don't have enough time when we travel down there, but there are some good vantage points in the park where you can look around better than anywhere else that I know of, at least public access, where you just do a 360. There's desert grassland, desert scrubland in every direction. So I think this, even though certainly it's not pristine, prior to 1952, 1953, this whole park, certainly there were cattle that were grazing here, but it's been almost 70 years. It's had a chance to recover from that grazing activity. This is the best example of desert grassland that I can show my students, which is why I like to bring my students here all the time. The second major addition to the park is you take that left, and if you're going towards Deming, you get on Highway 61, you go past Faywood, and you bypass that City of Rocks Road, and you continue on, and on your left, there are hundreds of acres of recently acquired rangeland, also part of that Gene Simon bequest, which is in addition to the park. And you can actually access this if you feel like you want, and there's some old roads that go through here. If you want to visit this, I'd recommend, I've talked with Gabe about this, the park manager. Stop in the visitor center and kind of get some baseline information about where you might access this broad. There's no cattle on here right now, or how you might access this particular part of the park. So I always like seeing, Highway 61, the old Bob Dylan song. And I made a comment in my previous version of this presentation, maybe Bob Dylan was thinking about this Highway 61. Of course, Johnny Winter had a nice version of that song. And someone watched the recorded version of this presentation, which I gave to the Albuquerque chapter. Several months later, I got an email from somebody who said, no, it was probably Highway 61 from up where Bob Dylan grew up around Hibbing. And I know Don and Wendy have a lot of experience up there in the iron country of Minnesota. So I learned something. This is probably not the Highway 61 that Bob Dylan was thinking of when he wrote that song. Just a little aside there. But that's the name of the road, and that's how you can access this broad, extensive rangeland, a recent acquisition. And if you get in the interior of this parcel of the park, there is a windmill, and there's a big stock tank here, and there's a wetland. That's my buddy Tim right there. We undoubtedly drove in his pickup truck, and this wetland here contains some aquatic and submerged plants that you don't see anywhere else in the park, and this is a close-up of that. Also, some very interesting birds. The park has got an interesting avifauna as well. First time Tim and I found Townsendia, this Easter daisy here, it was at this part of the park several years ago. And this is a common grass here, fluff grass, but to kind of show the cultural history of the park here. We took this photograph surrounding a former visitor to the park, maybe a former resident. So I kind of like this photograph. And the last major acquisition is again, you turn off the Highway 61, you're on this road, I think it's called City of Rocks Road, and you're looking down on the park. But before you start going downhill, you'll see a parking area to the left, and that provides access to the Cienega. And the Cienega is a desert wetland. And you park, and this is, those of you who came out last October, this is where we all met. Tomorrow, by the way, if you're coming out, meet at 10 o'clock at the Visitor Center. But anyway, so here we are. I just backed up the top of City of Rocks Road, looking down the park and the parking lot immediately to the left and out of sight of this particular slide. And there's about a 2.5 mile loop trail that will lead down, down, down. You look in the distance and, what's this? You see this little group of trees down here, and you'll be amazed when you get down there, Gooding's willow and sedge wetland. It's a little wetland, and that's what a Cienega is. It's a desert wetland, and this was acquired as part of a mitigation settlement with the mine. These three, the Table Mountain, that big rangeland along Highway 61, this desert Cienega, have all been within about the last 12 years. And when you get down near the bottom of that trail, before you turn around and come back, you'll see a boardwalk. And last fall, I took this picture, and you get on this boardwalk, and you have access to some wetland plants you'll see nowhere else, like the saltgrass, the sticulus. And when I was out there taking pictures, maybe it was late August in preparation for my presentation of the Audubon chapter, there's some yerba mansa right along the trail. I bent over, and then I heard a rattle, and this is me. I just kept on moving. There was a rattlesnake right underneath this boardwalk, so I just kept on moving, and I kind of kept my distance here. But you can find yerba mansa. There it is, right along this boardwalk. This is really a spectacular hike. If you're in the birds, those willows, those trees down there, there's barn owls down there, great horned owls. I think I heard a sore rail in the sedge meadow down there. It's not just about plants, it's also about the animals which occur in the park. And so as I conclude this presentation, and if you haven't been there, you're really in for a treat. I am getting towards the end. I always think about, having done a lot of projects like this, and I think of City of Rocks, even though it's certainly been altered, it had an extensive grazing history, but it certainly preserves remnant vegetation of desert grassland and desert scrubland. And so I always think about, what's the point of preserving such remnants of vegetation? And in my 30-plus year career as a botanist, most of us who are in this field can point to one paper that they've read that really sparked an interest and influenced them. With me, it was a paper published, someone who thought about this question: what's the importance of native vegetation in Australia? The title of this paper, which came out about 30 years ago, The Role of Remnants of Native Vegetation in Nature Conservation, Future Directions. And Dr. Saunders, I read this paper about every year. He lays out 4 reasons, and I think it applies here. It preserves individual species and their gene pools, like this plant, which I very seldom see. The only place I've seen it is in the park. Red bluet, Houstonia rubra. We have protected this plant. City of Rocks, the original park, that original mile square, hasn't had a cow on it, to my knowledge, since the early 50s. So that's one important role of when we recognize we have remnants of native vegetation. If you're trying to justify, why do we not need to save this? Here's a reason. We're protecting individual species and their gene pools. And we're also protecting particular ecosystems. A lot of you know A.T. Cole. He and his wife Cinda are real experts on desert grasslands, Cienegas, or desert wetlands, excuse me. And lo and behold, City of Rocks, the current boundaries of the park, we have this really significant desert wetland. This is perhaps the most accessible desert wetland within 50 miles of here. If you have a chance, go down there and you'll be astounded. What is Gooding's willow doing surrounded by all this rangeland and these sedges and rushes and yerba mansa? What's all this doing here? And there's a nice trail. There's that boardwalk again. You can walk down, turn around, and come back. So that's another of the 4 reasons that Dr. Saunders in his, and to me, seminal paper put forth. And also preserves important ecological and evolutionary processes. I know a lot of you here are into birds, so am I. If you've never seen a Cassin's sparrow, go to the park and maybe late month, I guess early April, mid-April, go on the Overlook Road, go to the top. It's a fairly nondescript sparrow, but it sings on the fly. And it's pretty reliable there right along the fence. It's a very fascinating behavior. We got yuccas there and yucca moss. A lot of ecological processes, evolutionary processes are preserved. Read our recent issues of the newsletter of the Friends of City of Rocks. Tim's written a number of articles about he's really into snakes. There's an article about snake extrasensory perception in the current edition of the newsletter. Fascinating. All kinds of ecology and evolution that's going on there and to consider and ponder. And then not everybody's into identifying 320 plant species or every last bird, but people can enjoy native vegetation remnants, I guess maybe at a different level, kind of in their own way. It provides, according to Dr. Saunders, people opportunities to experience nature in different ways. You know, pitch your tent amongst these rocks here, spend the night there. And as Don alluded to, I mean, there's some really spectacular skies there at night. There's monthly star parties there, which you can read about to get on the City of Rocks website, or look at our newsletter. You can find out when they are going to occur. So finally, this is my last slide. I have found, having spent a lot of time in this park since 2004, this is just a spectacular place. And there's just birds and plants and cultural history. If you haven't been there, some of you are coming out for the first time tomorrow. You are really in for a treat. That's the end of my presentation, and I hope I've piqued your interest. And I hope to see, I know we're not running away yet, I hope to see some of you tomorrow so that we can hear what Ed has to teach us about cacti and yuccas and agaves. And I'm sure Russ and myself will have some information to share. It's an opportunity to get introduced to the flora of the park. I know Tim, who's going to be coming along, will probably begin this by giving us a little couple-minute overview of the history of the park, which I've alluded to in this presentation. But we'll have a lot of fun. So thanks for coming and letting me talk about an area that I'm really passionate about, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Okay. Done, Don.
Okay. Perfect timing, Bill.
How long did that go?
Just about long enough.
Okay. I'm done.
Well, we started at the top of the hour, and it's 7:46, so I asked you to go 45 minutes, and I think that was perfect. So, Bill, could you tell us a little bit? I'd like to start off with this field trip for birding in February. Could you just give us a little synopsis of that?
So that will start at 9 o'clock, I think on February 12th, and Karen Beckenbach and I are going to co-lead that. Have you ever been out so you'll meet at the visitor center at 9 o'clock, and we've talked, as opposed to some previous bird hikes, we're going to make numerous stops where we're not going to be walking 2 miles. We're going to go, we know some places where great horned owls typically nest right near the visitor center. There's a place where you frequently see a barn owl. And so it'll be an opportunity to see the common birds of the park. There's almost always rock wrens bobbing up and down on the rocks. You'll hear sage phoebes, cactus wrens. So there's a few places that I have in mind along that loop trail. And I'm sure Karen and I will go out beforehand and scope this out. If you're into sparrows, if you've been out with Karen is really good. And a specialty bird that if you've not seen, it used to be called the sage sparrow. Now that's been split up. Now the interior version of that is the sagebrush sparrow. Good place to see that is that Cienega Trail. We're not going to walk the entire extent of that Cienega Trail because I know some folks are coming along. They don't have, they're not in a position to walk that distance. But I think even near that, the parking lot of the Cienega Trail, there'll be a good opportunity to see a number of different sparrow species. So 9 o'clock at the Visitor Center, February 12th, and Karen and I are going to, Karen Beckenbach, an introduction to the birds of City of Rocks. It's a good desert avifauna. Black-throated sparrows are about guaranteed. So that's what's in store there. That's sponsored by the Friends.
So, Bill, just to be clear, you're talking about meet at 9 o'clock at the Visitor Center at City of Rocks State Park.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Tomorrow is 10 o'clock.
Right.
Yeah, 10 o'clock. We're going to give everything a chance to warm up. 10 o'clock tomorrow. Yep.
So what would be some good resources, books, etc., for folks that wanted to know a little bit more about the native vegetation of City of Rocks or our native, more local Gila region?
Well, for one thing, as I alluded to, City of Rocks and this part of the state was probably desert grassland, desert scrubland for the last 10,000 years. Grasses are the dominant. Certainly there are cacti and yuccas and agaves, but grasses are among the dominant vegetation. So I think it's UGWA has published a recent revision of common grasses of Grattan-Catron County, which is a prelude to what you're going to produce, Don. And there's a lot of pictures. And so that would be a good resource. I mean, it's not focused on City of Rocks, but most of the common grasses at the park are going to be featured with nice line drawings and brief descriptions. I think someone could go out and certainly identify the grama grasses and some of the other common tubosa and plains love grass, etc. Plains bristlegrass. That's one. And if you want a copy of my tentative plant, Don's got it. Just send me an email, and then you can use that. You can get on Russ's website, gilaflora.com, and Russ will tell you that he had to put some boundaries around, and jump in there, Russ, if you'd like. I think you call this flora of the Gila region or the Gila wilderness. There are some plants in that desert flora at City of Rocks, which Russ does not have in his website because he had to draw a line. But many of those plants Russ has found down, I think down WD Ranch Road, down
So
towards
Bill, you're kind of breaking up.
Can you hear me now?
Your voice is breaking up. Yeah,
Can you
that's
hear me
good.
now, Don?
Yes, that's good. Russ, do you
Okay.
have anything to add to that?
Well, from the standpoint of general, I'm looking at the question, and the question is, can you recommend books for a beginner to identify plants and trees of the region? It kind of depends upon the level of the person who wants to know what books there are. If you're a beginner, I'd consider getting Ivy's Flowering Plants of New Mexico, which is an amazing spiral-bound book of drawings of plants of New Mexico. It's picture matching, but if you don't know how to use keys or don't want to put in that kind of time, then Ivy's book is a great beginner's way of finding out what plants you're looking at. If you're more sophisticated in how you deal with plants of an area, then I think you have to go with Kelly Allred's Flora Neo-Mexicana 3, which is a book of keys. That is not something a beginner is going to comport well with. However, as anybody who's done a lot of botany knows, the only real way to get to know the plants of an area is to key them out and to collect a lot of them.
And I would share with you, of course, cacti are certainly an important part of our flora. It's a great book by Michael Powell, who's a retired professor from Sul Ross. Cacti of the Trans-Pecos region. We're not in the Trans-Pecos region, but most of the cacti which occur here are presented in that book. That's probably the best book on cacti that I'm aware of. Michael Powell, long retired but still active botanist from Sul Ross down there in Alpine, Texas.
Okay.
Trees of, are you holding that up there? Yeah, okay. Trees of and Shrubs of New Mexico, which is a book which was sponsored by the Gila chapter of the New Mexico Native Plant Society. The third edition was finished up posthumously after Jack's unfortunate passing. It's a book I've been using for almost 20 years as a textbook when I teach dendrology. Nice line drawings. Don, jump in there. You have some things to say about this book.
Yes. If you're interested in Trees and Shrubs of New Mexico by Jack Carter, the most recent edition, you can go to our website, Gila NPS, gilanps.org, and we have a bookstore. It's a very, very small bookstore, but that is available there. It's $30. Another book by one of our own is these common southwestern native plants. So certainly authors Jack Carter and Martha Carter, Jennifer Busolo, but Donna Stevens, who will be giving our program in the spring on some of our spring wildflowers, is a co-author of that. So let's see here. It says this wonderful slideshow available anywhere online? Well, you must have seen that we recorded. And so this will be up on our website at gilanps.org in the next few days. And so you can watch it as many times as you want. The name Kelly Allred, sort of the quintessential botanist of New Mexico. I mean, he's written, I wouldn't say the Bible, but the Bibles, because he has new edition of, and it's wonderful. So yes, it can be technical, but he has a writing style that that you will love. And he has a glossary of botanical names from the plants that we have here in New Mexico. And it's just wonderful, wonderful reading. So you can contact us at gilanative@gmail.com. Send us an email and we can give you some of that information. There was a little talk about Aristida and a little slander of Aristida. I love the Threons. The Threons are absolutely beautiful. I mean, think about the purple Threon. I don't think there's anything as pretty a grass that comes up early in the spring. So
that's a grass genus that some of you in here are aware. We have this Flora of North America, and Kelly Allred, who's one of the most gracious guys that you'll ever meet. He wrote the treatment of Aristida for Flora of North America. That was, I'm sure, a daunting task. Yeah, I think they're beautiful, and it's when they're mature, they're not really of high forage value, but they're part of our flora. They're native, and I agree with you that Aristida purpurea, that's a beautiful plant.
When Kelly Allred was our guest some months ago and did a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and it is on our website. So you can go there and you can see Kelly Allred in all of his glory. But his title was something, the Flora Neo-Mexicana Revised or something like that. What was I thinking? I mean, if you look at the 4 or 5 volumes that he has, it's just incredible. One of the things that Chris Overlock wants us to let you know, and this is a very important thing, is that there is a $5 entrance fee at City of Rocks. Yes, Bill?
Yeah, if you're a member of the Friends, you don't have to pay that entrance fee. So not everybody here is a member of the Friends. Yeah, that's right. I got that confirmed by Gabe. They expect participants to to contribute that $5 entrance fee. Yep. I don't have any control over that.
No.
That's correct.
If anybody else has a question, we have a few minutes left. Just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question. Not all at once.
While people are pondering questions, maybe there are none. If you just like to hike, excuse me, there's a great trail system within the original park. It's called the Hydra Trail. You can do it for its entire extent, 2.5, 3 miles, or you can, you can tailor your hike to your hiking interest, your hiking ability, and you can hike part of it. It takes you throughout the entire extent of that original park. And I see people out there on their mountain bikes out there. It's just, there's just all kinds of different ways that people can enjoy that park. Stars, birds, plants, cultural history, just, camping in a very kind of almost like a moonscape, all those pillars coming up. It's just wild.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. It's a beautiful.
So there's some good hiking opportunities there.
Yeah, and one of the things that I like about it is that any hiking ability, all levels, they're very flat trail around the park, up to the Table Mesa, a little more challenging. Not, it's not too that challenging. And so anyway, so everybody has a trail or a trail system there that you can handle, and that's wonderful. As we close, that Cienega, Cienegas, I grew up in Illinois and moved to Minnesota, and then I came to the Southwest, and I'm having a wonderful time learning about all this wonderful vegetation and the birds and the culture and the archaeology. But I'm just that cienega, that concept, and that. Tell us some, and Russ, you can jump in also. What is so special about that cienega that we have here at City of Rocks? What are some of the special plants? What are the special attributes of that?
Well, first of all, and then Russ just jump in there, any wetland in a desert is pretty special. And again, I mentioned A.T. and Cinda Cole, who own the Pitchfork Ranch off of Separ Road. They really know about cienegas, and they actually wrote up a big paper for the Gila Symposium, which is published through painstaking effort. They documented cienegas in the Southwest. So many of them have been altered, they've been destroyed. They're I don't know what their original frequency was, but many of them have been damaged beyond ecological function. So, the cienega there, the ones on the Pitchfork Ranch are just really special. Special plants, and that's the one that I know, the one at City of Rocks. Lots of Gooding's willow, the sedge meadow with Chenoplectus americanus, chairmaker sedge, which is a real tall type of a bulrush, yerba mansa, that Distichus spicata, saltgrass, a number of rush species. These are, as I continue this inventory work, when that became available in part of the park, the plant species list, and we probably added about 30 species right off the bat. It's also a rattlesnake country. A little anecdote here, out with my buddy Tim, who's really got a real fifth and sixth sense about rattlesnakes. I'm kind of a sedge guy in the midst of this sedge meadow one fall day, and all of a sudden I hear a rattle, and it didn't even occur to me that a rattlesnake would be in the middle of a sedge meadow. I just remember Tim, well, Bill, you better get out of there. And so if you're on that Cienega Trail, be on the lookout. Anywhere in the park in the appropriate season, there's 4 or 5 species of venomous snakes, and that's their environment. They belong there, but you've got to keep your eyes open. Russ he and I had an experience probably 8-10 years ago up by the overlook there. We were just walking along, and one or the other of us just about stepped on one, and I don't think you saw a couple guys jump back so fast as we did, and there was a Western Diamondback. And if you're into snakes, Tim will be there tomorrow. He can tell you what he knows about the snake fauna. Russ, you want to jump in there?
Something else about that cienega that hasn't been mentioned yet is there's actually a few raptors that hang out there as well, and owls. So if you're into raptors or owls, you won't want to walk quickly when you're there, or else all you hear is a big flapping of wings and they'll be gone. But if you walk slowly on that boardwalk or elsewhere around that cienega, you're likely to find an owl or two or a few raptors to watch.
And with my Midwestern upbringing sensibility, I've been really interested in birds about as long as I've been interested in plants. Barn owls are really scarce in the Midwest. And so to come down to City of Rocks and to see a nest box that more often than not has a barn owl in it, that's a pretty special thing. And if the owl's not there, you'll see the owl pellets. And as Russ just alluded to, the cienega, my former student, she's now working in Texas at a state park, Roxanne Snyder, she did the video, which is now in the visitor center. She got footage of a great horned owl chasing a barn owl out of those willows. What were the odds of that? So I told Roxanne, you've caught some footage that not too many people, professional wildlife photographers have managed to capture. So and I think long-eared owls roost there sometimes in the winter. In fact, I know they do. So you're right, Russ. There's always a red-tailed hawk or two during, not right now, but during the breeding season. Swainson's hawks are common there. It's always fun to see when they come back, and occasionally you'll see a zone-tailed hawk fly over. Of course, those birds are gone. They're migratory. The Swainson's hawks are down in South America right now, but the bird life is just as fascinating as the plant life. And a recent employee of the park who has moved on, Tony Godfrey, spectacular photographer. He's documented there's all kinds of dragonflies in these wetland areas, butterflies. There's something there for everybody. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot about moss. I don't know how much work Ron Perry has done on moss at City of Rocks, but I'm looking forward to that presentation coming up. Maybe we'll get Ron to go down there and set up some lights and do some censuses, some surveys of moss at the park.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
It's 8:04. We had 49 participants, but that doesn't count those of you sitting there as couples. So this was an excellent, excellent turnout tonight, and I thank you. And I think it's a testament to both Bill and the fact that City of Rocks is such an unbelievable, wonderful place. So,
it is.
So we hope to see you on the field trip tomorrow. Meet at the Visitor Center at City of Rock State Park at 10 o'clock. And we'll go for a couple of hours. If you want to stick around and hike the Seneca Trail, it's cool right now. The rattlesnakes aren't out, so don't worry about that if you have a problem. And then you could walk up Table Mesa or whatever after we're done. So bring a lunch. And
I tell you what, as a professional botanist, which I guess I am, I'm looking forward to learning a lot more about cacti than I already know from Ed Like, who's going to be the primary leader of this trip. And I know Russ always has some interesting anecdotes about plants, things I'm not aware of. And it's always the case, participants tell me about things that I didn't know about these plants. It's just kind of a mutual sharing of information, learning activity. And I think we're supposed to have pretty nice weather by mid-morning tomorrow. And it's always a little warmer at the park than it is here. So
right. Very good. Well, thank you, Bill. I just like to mention, folks, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, and mask up if that's the way you feel comfortable. I will be masked. Of course, we'll be outside. We'll maintain the social distancing, and if we're spread apart a little bit, we'll have our botanists speak up a little bit. But please know that we want to be careful. As I said, we're not out of this yet. We're going to get back to a time when we can go and have a nice field trip and get together and all bunched down together and look at a plant, but probably not tomorrow. So just use common sense, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Otherwise, we'll see the rest of you somewhere online on on our February presentation. So thanks for turning out. It was a great turnout.
have a good evening, everybody.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.